everybody. So welcome to this month's edition of My Life on the Hill, November 2011, the penultimate month of 2011. Some interesting things to talk about this month. I'm going to do a little bit of willow work. You'll notice that I'm immersed in amongst hazel and willow, which I tend to cut a lot of at this time of year. Some of it gets sold for hazel bean sticks, hurdling, things like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to make our way in a minute down to the bottom of the field, and I'm going to decapitate a living willow tree, show you how to grow a willow tree, very, very straightforward, and take the material back up to the house and make a little feature around our raspberry bed. We're also going to go and wander down into the orchard. I'm going to show Liv, whose camera's shaking as we speak, all about the apples that are available. We'll pick some of those up, Liv can take some of those back to Cornwall. It's a little bit gloomy, so the colours might be a bit compromised because of this kind of anti-cyclonic gloom that we're immersed in today, but nonetheless we're going to have a fabulous show, so follow me. Right, well, I'm going to cut this beast down. Interestingly, this tree, which is now 25 foot tall, something like that, was planted as a little stem of willow that's probably somewhere in the region of that big, about 5 years ago. So that enormous contribution to my fire and some fabulous features, some of which we'll look at the making of later on, was off the back of something as simple as that. So wonderful. I'm going to cut this tree down now purely because it's too big. I can use the material. The big wide stem will be firewood for next winter, and these slim little rods are great for weaving. I mean, they also make great fedges, living features as well. But it's too big now. The other thing I intend to do later this year is plant a lot more of these rods in the ground, especially along this ditch, relatively moist. The willows quite like that, and they grow very, very quickly. The other beauty about willow, of course, is when you look at this tree, you'll notice that there's quite a lot of damage on here, and that's because the bark has been stripped by deer and squirrels and rabbits. But willow can take that kind of abuse. There are lots of other trees that really can't take that, and they'll die off. So it's a kind of win-win situation, really. So I'll begin hacking this down. Not really far off, no, I don't think. That's good, as he says. So that stump will sprout out now. What will happen is, well, within 3 years there will be growth this high from that stump with lovely little fat rods like that, and within 10 years there will be beautiful little log-sized pieces of timber, probably that size, sprouting out here. So it's a very simple way of supplying firewood for yourself and material to make features with. So I'm going to cut this apart now, get some nice straight rods to take up to the house. And with those rods, we'll weave them between some uprights and make a nice little low hurdle, which is essentially a sort of woven fence panel. We're particularly good at that, and it should last 5 or 6 years. It very much depends on the situation, but generally speaking, a willow panel will last 5 or 6 years. Hazel tends to last a little bit longer because it's a bit slower growing. And consequently a little bit harder, a bit more robust. But it's very easy to make, very easy to take down, and if you're growing it yourself, relatively inexpensive. And if by chance you've got any sheep kicking around your garden, they definitely help you tidy up a bit. Okay, so we're going to take this little lot up to the house, and you guys can get an idea of the purpose of my hacking that tree down. Okay, so we're back at the top of the hill next to the house, and I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of hurdle making. It's very straightforward. What I've used for the uprights, which are essentially the fixed rods that I'll be weaving those willow rods through, is chestnut. And the reason I'm using chestnut is there's lots of tannin in it, and consequently when you drive it into the ground it lasts a relatively long time underneath the soil. Willow, if you bury it in the ground, 6 months it will have, unless it's alive, it will rot off. If it's alive when you put it in the ground, of course it's going to grow. I don't want willow growing here because we're literally stood on top of my septic tank, and I don't want those roots finding their way to the piping associated with the septic tank, because believe you me, if I did that, in 2 years' time I'd take the lid off the septic tank, I'd look in there and it will be full of willow rootlets. So I'm going to skin this chestnut, a relatively simple operation. I'm going to use a hacker. The best thing to do in many respects is to use a draw knife, and then you're quite literally pulling it to you, but for purposes of today we'll just take off this bark. And the reason for this is aesthetically it improves the look. The bark, you could just put the chestnut in the ground with the bark on, but and it will fall off naturally. In some respects I've done that before now in lots of school playgrounds, and it's quite nice because the kids can pull the bark off. You know, they're allowed to do it. It's not a problem. Can you tell that we're stood on top of the septic tank, Liv? So you're getting some interesting bouquets occasionally.
Yes, but that's an interesting word, a bouquet. Yes, absolutely. I thought there was something a bit whiffy going on. I mentioned that because it's not me. Well, it sort of is me in a sort of disgusting sense.
That's funny. That's funny. Right, and now I'm going to get my hammer. And I'm going to put this rod in the ground. It's sensible to use a bar to make a pilot hole, because even if your ground's really soft, if you want to put something in the ground that you want to end up being straight, then a pilot hole is a sensible thing to do. So I'm just going to do that there. I'm going to put this rod in, and I'm going to tap these in the ground. Now this little hurdle, I want it to be to low. All it's doing really is marking the boundary. I don't want it to be high because I don't want it to compromise our picking raspberries. So it's just essentially a little low feature. Okay, now you notice the heights of those across the top slightly different, but it doesn't really matter, because when I've built up the rods, the weaving rods, I'll cut all the tops off flush anyway, so it doesn't matter to begin with. I mean, quite simply, I'll take a rod and I'll weave it in and out of these uprights. So having put a couple there, what's quite important in order to tighten up the end post is to pull back the rod that needs to be relatively skinny, relatively thin, and you snap it and twist it, and that will pull the end rod tight in with the one that's next to it, so you're making a nice sort of rigid structure. And then carry on weaving that bit back through the posts. Now you also notice that what I'll do is I sort of alternate the ends. So I'll put one thick end this end and then another thick end that end, and then you end up with a nice uniform build up really of the rods. Otherwise what will tend to happen if you're using the thick end on one end, you'll end up with the one end of that hurdle being quite fat and the other one being really skinny. Sorry dude. Okay, so I've pretty much finished what I wanted to do. Just a small feature, low feature, and I'm going to trim it up. And interestingly, when you trim something up, as you probably know, it tends to make all the difference. So I'm going to cut the ends, cut the tops flush, job done. And there you go, finished article. This little patch of grass that I've built the hurdle next to is fabulous habitat for voles. When we're lucky, there are lots and lots of bank voles here anyway. But one of the reasons I leave the grass as seemingly unkempt as I do is because it does provide lovely little avenues and kind of tracts of cover for the voles. And often, you know, just on the break of darkness in the summertime, I'll sit out on the patio and be thinking about nothing in particular, having a glass of beer or wine or something, winding down, and an owl will land on that little coal shed roof that's just behind you. And the reason it's doing that is because it knows that the first port of call is this little patch of grass where it's likely to get a meal. It's because if I didn't have the voles here, then Mr. Owl wouldn't visit. And it just makes for such a more interesting space, and they are completely harmless. I mean, if you're proud of your lawn, then perhaps having holes like this in it, you know, doesn't kind of fit with your mentality. But for me, you know, this space is made a lot more interesting because of the kind of the vole dynamic, if you like.
Here we go.
Happy days. Okay. Feel the apples shooting in. Very good. Very good. Fantastic. Excellent.
Fantastic.
That was really good, wasn't it?
I could do that for another couple of hours. That's brilliant.
Really good. Brilliant stuff.
Might need a thermos of tea to go along with it, but it's quite chilly today, isn't it?
It is.
Shall I take
really
over?
Good. That's really good. Yeah, no, I think you. That's a brilliant bit of imagery going on there. I mean, orchards are fabulous for all sorts of different things, but now we're down here. I'm going to take this opportunity to take a bunch of these ashmead kernels up. Some that are on the floor. I mean, you can see the ones that the birds have really enjoyed. I mean, this orchard is full of thrushes sometimes. You know, all the non-native redwings and fieldfares come down and feast on all these apples. The deer really like the apples. My chickens are particularly fond of these apples, and I cook them up. So if we've got the oven going, I'll just put a whole bunch of apples on a baking tray, put them in the oven, you know, just forget about them. Sometimes I forget about them for too long and they explode and make a right mess in the oven. It takes me 2 hours to clean the oven, but nevertheless the chickens enjoy them, and because you cook them, obviously for the chickens it's easier to digest. And some of the chickens at the moment that are being fattened up, that ultimately will be the contribution to our Sunday roast, will benefit from the flavours of the food that they eat. And I don't like to give animals conventionally made foodstuffs, because like your own diet, if you're buying processed food, you don't really know what's in it. So it's quite nice to feed them these, and they really enjoy them. So I'm going to fill these bags up with some, and we'll take them up. Well, this is the time of day where I'm going to say bye-bye. I'm just sitting back now and admiring what I've done over the last couple of days. I cut this lavender back yesterday hard. Lavender needs a really good hard pruning, and it'll come back quite nicely the year after. And what's particularly nice about this lavender here is if the sceptic tank's ponging a bit, you know, you can sort of rub past the lavender and it takes the edge off it, things a little bit. So really, for me, this week, this month even, until just before Christmas, I'll say goodbye. I'll see you next time.